Shabbat Shalom. Someone said to me, pretty recently actually, "Oh, Rabbi, I love your sermons. You always talk about how the Torah doesn't mean what it says." Which, as a rabbi, is the last thing you want to hear anybody say about your sermons. I had to get them to clarify, and what they meant was that I often bring an interpretation from our ancient or medieval commentators, rabbis, that sheds light on a deeper meaning beyond the surface of what the Torah says. And this is true, 99% of the time, more. I stand up here and I deliver insights from our most brilliant commentators, men whose knowledge of our texts will forever far exceed my own. No matter how long I study, they always will know more than I do. But today, perhaps for the first time, I think, I'm going to tell you the oldest bone I have to pick with how the vast majority of our wisest rabbis approach what happens in the Torah regarding a very famous pair of brothers. In Toldo, we just heard, we've got these twin brothers, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob, Matthew explained it so beautifully, is a mild-mannered guy, a homebody, and Esau is the rugged hunting type. One day, and a lot of us are familiar with the story, Jacob is cooking a stew outside, as one does. Esau sees it, he's hungry, he's been hunting all day, and he asks his brother for a little bit of food that he's making. And Jacob, mild-mannered Jacob, says, "Sell me your birthright." This is a huge ask. You should know, in ancient times, that was no small thing. Your birthright, what you got for being the firstborn son, you got double the inheritance that anybody else had got in the family. That's huge. And in response to this ridiculous, outlandish request, Esau says, "Okay." Now, a ton of rabbis, ancient, medieval, modern, interpret this little bit of their story as an example of how wicked Esau is. What? They say, he despised his birthright. He wasn't cheated of anything because he didn't think it was worth anything. I always dislike these interpretations of Esau and his actions because it seems to me that if anyone's being a jerk in this situation, it's Jacob. You could say, yes, Esau was being a little dramatic. He says, I'm going to die anyway, so who cares about a birthright? Okay, yes, that's dramatic, but to me it just shows how desperate he was. And yes, maybe he was being a tad impulsive, but he's a young guy, is that a crime? I think taking advantage of your brother is a bigger no-no. Later in the parsha, we get the story of the blessing, and Matthew also outlined this so beautifully. Isaac is very old, his vision has deteriorated completely, he's blind. And he calls Esau, his favorite son, the hunter, the famous hunter, and asks him to get some game, cook it, give it to me, and I'll give you your blessing, your special blessing for being the firstborn. Rebecca hears this, she prefers Jacob. She wants him to get that special blessing. And so she says, I'll cook the food, you'll bring it to Isaac, you'll get the special blessing. What's Jacob's response to this little bit of trickery? Does he say, mother, I cannot take my brother's rightful blessing? No. Does he say, no, mother, I cannot trick my sightless, dying father? Nay. He says, hey, my brother Esau is hairy and I'm smooth and my father will think of me as a trickster. He's worried, all right? He's worried about getting caught. And he even knows he's going to come off like a trickster, so he knows what he's doing. He's not on the up and up. But Jacob doesn't take much convincing, and with a few strategically placed furs, he tricks old Isaac and steals his brother's blessing. Esau is, I think understandably, furious, and he swears that as soon as their father is gone, he's going to kill his brother and take his revenge. So many interpretations I've read about this part of their story. They see the real crime as being done by Esau. Esau? What? They say, Jacob was justified because he was supposed to be a great man, so it's okay what he did to get there. What? They say, but Esau, he was the bad guy. He wanted to kill his own brother. He's violent. He was an animal, not even a man. I'm thinking, I can see how he got so mad. First the birthright, then the blessing. I would be ticked. Wouldn't you be ticked? Toldot ends with two little verses. You'd think they were throwaways, except there are no throwaways in Torah. Esau watches Jacob being sent away, ostensibly to find a bride from among his mother's people, his family, and it wasn't weird in those days. Because, the Torah says, local girls displease their parents very much. Rebecca says, and I think this is where Esau gets his flair for the dramatic, she says, I despair of my life of these local girls that Esau has married. Because he already took several wives from the local women. And the Torah tells us, Vayar Esav ki ra'ot banot Canaan. Esau realized the Canaanite women he married displeased his parents, so he went and married a member of his family. He married a cousin. The interpretations of this little vignette, they're all negative about Esau. What a surprise. They say, oh, he only married a woman in his family so he could inherit more land, which is not what he says. They say, oh, he should have divorced his previous wives first, which if they think the issue is polygamy, they're going to have a lot of fun with Jacob next week in the parsha because he gets himself not one, but 4 women. So clearly polygamy is not the issue in the Torah. Look, I'm not standing here saying, oh, Esau is a misunderstood saint. He's not a saint. But he's not a devil either. And when I look at just the words of the Torah, I see a guy who was a little impulsive in his youth. He was angry at being unfairly dealt with twice by his own brother. A guy who just wanted to do what made his parents happy. But the narrative that we hear so often in these interpretations is that Esau was bad, that he was not just bad, he was evil, in fact. I don't see it. And I think we do a disservice to the whole narrative the Torah is trying to paint by oversimplifying it into Jacob good, Esau evil. Because at the end of the day, people are never that simple. It may be easy to think of them that way, to think of ourselves that way, because then you can either vaunt or dogpile, and that always feels good. But real people in real life are a mix of motivations and emotions and values. And I like that my Torah reflects that. That makes the Torah real and realistic and relevant. Moreover, I don't think Jacob's story is nearly as compelling if you think of him as this kind of angel child from birth through adolescence, through manhood. He always did good things. He was right all the time. He was perfect. He was wonderful. Because who knows somebody like that? I don't. And I know I'm not like that. Frankly, Judaism as a religion doesn't do saints. All of our patriarchs, all our matriarchs are fallible. And we're meant to look at them and consider them as human beings like ourselves. Jacob was a trickster. As a child and a young man, he took advantage of his brother's impulsiveness. He went along with his mother's machinations. He deceived his blind, dying father. He stole. He was not someone to admire in Toldot. But that's okay. The Torah is not a collection of little sound bites. It's a symphony. And you have to hear the whole thing to understand it. Later on, Jacob matures. He gets married. He starts a business. He raises children. He takes a spiritual leadership role, and he learns the value of hard work, of being a good person, and of maintaining peace in a family. And much later, when he confronts his brother, he comes on his knees, begging forgiveness, bearing gifts. And it's forgiveness that Esau immediately and wholeheartedly bestows. That is a narrative I find much more compelling. 2 brothers who dealt with a lot in their lives, whose lives shaped them. That shows me a Torah that reflects the truth of our own lives in it. Because real life is never black and white, but a most beautiful and unsettling gray, where people are almost never all good or all evil, but somewhere in between, or even both by turns. And all of us can overcome shaky beginnings to become truly great. That's a Torah I want to read. That is a religion I am proud to ascribe to. Not one that shows caricatures or people with static, unchanging lives. One that mirrors real life with all of its glorious messiness and provides an example for how we can become even better versions of ourselves. So on this count, I will very respectfully, disagree with so many of our ancient and medieval and modern sages, who 99.999% of the time I look to for their wisdom because it is immense wisdom. in favor of this time looking at the Torah, just the text, on its own, at the simple but powerful truths contained therein. Shabbat Shalom.